Well, it's interesting because what unity teaches is certainly that everything is holy now. We teach that God is present everywhere, that God is within us, that we are all divine beings. And yet, if you look at chapter 5 of Discover the Power Within, which is Eric Butterworth, one of the most famous unity ministers who had the church in Lincoln Center in New York City and had thousands of folks in his congregation on Sunday morning, wrote this book. And chapter 5 says, from miserable sinners to masters. I'm guessing that all of us in this room have some concept about what sin is. And I would love it, and I know some of you sat in the back row so you wouldn't have to share. But since the front row is missing this morning, you are in the front row. Ha ha, I got you. Anyway, I'm interested in having a conversation about what is sin. Now, I grew up in a country church in Swanton, Ohio, Braley Union Church. I learned things like the wages of sin is death. If you sin, you're going to go to hell. I learned that I was taught that if I were sitting in my living room with 3 or 4 of you, and we were at a card table, and we were playing Old Maid and drinking ginger ale, and somebody looked through the window, might think we were gambling and drinking beer, that I would have committed a sin. Drinking ginger ale and playing Old Maid in my living room. Now, I'm not sure that all of you have that kind of a vision of what a sin is, but I'm interested if you would just share. What is sin? What do you consider sinful?
Now, at this place in life, I feel like sin is when you go against yourself. You feel it as a sense of guilt. And whether that guilt comes from all the conditioning and society and church or whatever, but it's just who you are at that point. If it doesn't feel right, if you're feeling guilty, if it's in your head and playing out as something you should not have done, it feels like a sin, as opposed to some list of sins that may or may not apply to you.
I like that definition. Good for you. Thank you. All right, Linda.
And to build on that, those things that you feel bad or feel guilty about separates you from that sense of the God within. So sin to me is separating yourself from God.
How would you relate shame to sin?
I would say it's similar. Yeah, I'd say it's similar.
So in other words, if you're feeling shameful about something,
yeah, that separates you from that sense of the divine within yourself and within others.
okay. Anybody else have? I mean, I learned things like gambling were sin, drinking were sin, dancing was sinful.
Hey, my name's John. I'm
Hi,
actually
John.
visiting from New York City. And as soon as you said the word, I had like a visceral reaction. I grew up in the South, and I'm also gay. And those two words were connotated with one another. And I was fortunate, my church, I grew up United Methodist. I actually go to a Methodist church in New York now, but I've also done Unity over the years. And I was fortunate that I was brought up in a church that did not go down those sort of like very intense rabbit holes. It was more a church built on the foundations of the teachings of Jesus and of love and of sort of like the golden rule, et cetera. So I didn't hear that overtly, but it was covertly messaged through the society in which I was brought up in, and especially the environment. And I remember going to college, and I went to like the Wesley Center, and I was there on like the sex talk night, and I was like, and the guy basically was like, if you do anything besides like kiss before marriage, like that's a sin. And I was like, I'm in the wrong place. I was just like, I don't belong here. And so now, all that to being said, that it's a very charged topic, but I agree with what others have said, is that times that I've gone against my intuition, times that I've like overrode that small voice, I've either gotten burned or paid like dear consequences for. And so now I'm about fostering that inner voice and listening to that guidance, because for me, when I've gone against it in the past, it's been almost disastrous actually in my life. And so I'm trying to foster and believe in myself and kind of that return to home. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.
You know, you mentioned one of the other big categories of sin: sex. I almost, there wasn't much of a distinction. Any kind of sex was a sin. Again, back in my little country church. Ellen?
I grew up in a more fundamentalist church, and I think and actually this was a Presbyterian, but the message was we are all sinners, and too bad we can't help it. And our mission is to find ways to behave better than breaking all the rules from the Bible that we've been given. So we just have to accept that we are sinners and that we are trying to do better.
All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. I heard that a lot. What else was a sin? Maybe it'd be easier to say, what wasn't a sin?
I think for me, I grew up with in an Episcopal church, and it seemed like we went over the 10 Commandments on a regular basis. And I guess that's how I would think of a sin. And, I don't even remember all the 10 Commandments because it's been so long. But I do remember that, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet what the neighbor has, and it just went on and on. And so I guess that's how I grew up, is that those things were sinful.
Just in case you wanted to brush up on the 10 Commandments, I have them right here. You shall have no other God before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. In other words, don't swear. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Aren't you glad you came to church today? Honor your father and mother. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. That's it. That's their list. So have you ever pondered the fact, did Jesus teach sin? John, you referred to the fact that you study what Jesus taught. Does anybody remember anything where Jesus taught anything about sin? So I'm guessing, adultery was a big one here, okay? And yet, what did Jesus say to the woman who was going to be stoned for committing adultery? She's forgiven. And what did they say? What did he say to the people who were going to stone her? Linda.
Those who were without a sin, throw the first stone.
And did anyone throw a stone? Isn't it fascinating that the list of sins, honestly listed in the Bible, is pretty small, and yet it has been the focus of most churches for about not quite 2,000 years, about 1,700 years. The Gnostics, who honestly were Jewish, they were people who lived in the desert and were committed to spirituality. They're the ones who started calling our bodies sinful. So sin is a strange topic. And it is, Eric calls that chapter From Miserable Sinners to Masters, because unity does not teach sin. Do you know what that word means in Aramaic, any of you? Pardon? A mistake? Close. It's actually an archer's term. It means to miss the mark. So if you've sinned, you were shooting for a bullseye with your arrow, and you missed. And for that, theoretically, you're going to hell. You missed the mark. So, I'm sure you heard the news yesterday in a mall down by Houston. We had another mass shooter. 8 people dead as of the last count that I heard, more in the hospital. We would call a guy that was shooting people in a mall evil. We might call him a sinner. Might we ask the question of why he's in a mall shooting people? Do you think he just got up in the morning and decided to go and sin? When we know people's stories, very few of them are about sin. As I sat with this topic over the week, which is what I do when I'm gonna, share with you on Sunday mornings, for years we've called drug abuse sin. What is drug abuse? An addiction? What is an addiction? It's an illness. So drug addiction isn't a sin. And yet how many people have been labeled as sinners? They may very well be in jail to this very day for having had drugs on their person. For 50 years now, we've been arresting people and putting them in jail for drug abuse, for selling drugs, gambling. Now, if you choose to lose all your money, you may have consequences for that act, but is the fact that you were playing a game and betting and lost money on it sinful? How about hypocrisy? How many hypocrites have you noticed in your life? How many things are secret? Are your secrets sinful? No. Think about the difference between secrets and privacy. I would guess that each of you believe that you have the right to keep some things private. That's why some of you sit in the back row. But you don't have to keep your opinion of sin private, but you can choose to, because we respect your right to choose. What do you think calling people sinners was really about? What were the people in charge intending when they called you sinners? I can't, well, you come on, Carol, be brave.
I think religion in general, most of them, and your question is they wanted to control it.
Bingo. It was about control. And how many of the people who were trying to control us broke those same laws? All we have to do is look at the Catholic Church. Bless their heart, they've done a lot of good in this world. My first husband was Catholic. My first husband that I married because I was a sinner. We'll go back to the sex sin. Woo, have a baby, get married. Okay. So if it's about control and you're trying to control someone else's behavior, how is what you're doing not sinful? I want to control you. I want to control your behavior. So if you do anything that most people normally and naturally do, who's the sinner? Do you see what I mean, Ellen?
I'm having a little trouble with control because I think in some ways it's teaching. In some ways it's teaching. It's showing a different way. You know, we have children that we control, or are we controlling them, or are we raising them up in a way for, you know, more of a teaching way? So the word control was a little flaky for me.
Okay. So what word would you use? We don't want to control our children. We want to...
Well, teach. Enable them to become who they really are.
Would we want to model behavior for our children? I don't mean to be pesky. Yes, I do.
No, well, hopefully not, because unless it's like the Berenstain Bears, which don't do what I do, kind of thing. You know, if you remember that storybook line from the father bear would be teaching his children, and he'd always make the mistakes, and he would say, "Don't do what I'm doing," because it was wrong.
So instead of control, would we like to teach logical consequences? If you do this, this might happen. When I was in charge of a Montessori school, we used a STEP program, Systematic Training for Effective Parenting. STEP. And the underlying message of that program was sort of like a mathematical if-then statement. If you do this, this may happen. So if you drive 80 miles an hour down 17th Street, what might happen? She lives on 17th further down. What might happen? You might have an accident, or you might get a ticket. So you have free will. You have a car. You have the ability to drive 70 miles an hour down 17th Street Parkway if you choose, But if you do this, this may happen. If you shoot people in a mall, what might happen? You might get arrested, or in this day and age, what do police tend to do? Shoot you. So if you shoot someone, you may get shot. Do you choose to carry a gun and shoot someone? If, my grandson Jay climbs everything. Most of you have seen him climb. He can go very fast. He's 2. He can get to the top of anything that you can't imagine. If he climbs up high, what may happen? He may fall and hurt himself. So should our family beat him because he climbs high? Or should we let him have some logical consequences? Please get down. You may fall. Boom. Cry. Tears. Maybe next time you shouldn't climb. So we want to teach people, but do we want to teach them that they're bad and sinners because they do it? No. And yet that's how we have chosen to teach for years. If we went back to drug abuse, do you know that now they no longer want to lock you up if you are a drug abuser? Now we recognize that it's an illness and that we need to help the person who has an addiction. And the people who used to be for lock them up, aren't doing that anymore. They're trying to reduce overdose deaths, which has been over 100,000 people annually. So locking them up purely didn't cure people of abusing drugs. Louder, I can't hear you. You are allowed to talk. I still didn't hear you. I'm sorry. Yeah, if you didn't hear him, he said you could get more drugs in jail than you can on the street. So locking people up wasn't an answer. Educating people. If you do this, this may happen. Logical consequences. You may have heard in the news this last week about Tucker Carlson, right? You all know that name. Star on Fox News. I'm guessing that if you didn't read some of the same article that I read this week, you may have a pretty bad opinion of him, and I want to just show you how what happens makes a difference. So most of the articles this past week wasn't talking about that Tucker Carlson's parents were divorced. He was an Episcopalian, Mark, raised in the Episcopal Church, sent to, St. George's elite Episcopalian boarding school. So he was a church-going Episcopalian. The school that he went to, St. George's, was the site of the worst sexual abuse scandal in modern times. The lead story from the New York Times talks about private hell, prep schools, sex abuse inquiry paints a grim picture. So he grew up in an environment that encouraged sex abuse. He's called misogynistic. Why do you think he might be called that way? Logical consequences rather than the leaders trying to control, sorry, Ellen, I'm going to use that word again, trying to control other people's behavior rather than look at their own. Another famous scripture from Jesus is, don't be worried about the mote in someone else's eye, worry about the beam in your own eye. Now, my little country church that I grew up in, which honestly was full of a lot of love and a lot of other things, my youth education sponsor was a closeted gay man who approximately 25 years later came out. Now, he wasn't a sinner because he was gay. He was a sinner because he wasn't true to himself. If we truly believe that each of us, exactly as we said here, yes, we are sexual beings. Yes, we do things that if we were hitting the mark, we might choose not to do. That is so different from having people stand up and accuse us of being sinners and telling us that we're going to hell. What we really want to do is tell people about the goodness that is present in all of them. We want to help them understand how to attain that goodness by, to the very best of our ability, modeling that behavior for them. The doctrine of original sin did not come out of Jesus' teachings. The other thing that is important for us to remember is that each of us is a divinely inspired, sacred being. John 8:32, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Matthew 5:48, ye therefore are perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. It's about our potential. You are potentially perfect, despite whatever it was you did last night. The Christ in you is the true light which lighteth every man coming into the world. John 1:9. If for the last 2,000 years we had been focused on the teachings of Jesus, we would live in a different world. Each of us would have a different experience of ourselves. The Hindu philosophy, if you ever have been in a yoga class or watched, goes, Namaste. I behold the divinity in you. They've been teaching that for thousands of years. Pretty much only Western culture has been focused on teaching you that you're a sinner. John 7:24, Jesus said, judge not by appearances, but judge by righteous judgment. Don't be fooled by the facade, the personality, or the superficiality of yourself or others. There is that in you that's stronger than your biggest weakness. And a weakness is not a sin. Everything is holy. Everything is holy now. And can we live in a way where we, me, Doris, is not judging somebody else for their own behavior? Can we live in a world where we're seeing each other as holy? Eric Butterworth actually quotes Ernest Holmes in this chapter. The quote from Ernest Holmes said, "There is hidden within the mind of man a divinity. There is incarnated in you and me that which is an incarnation of God. This divine sonship/daughtership is not a projection of that which is unlike our nature. It's not a projection of the divine into the human. Each of us can express the divinity that we were born with. There is no God beyond truth, and no revelation higher than the realization of the divinity that is within us all." So I invite you to simply choose to focus inward for a few moments. Perhaps taking a deep breath and letting it out. And as we let go of that breath, we can choose to let go of any shame that we have ever had. We can choose to let go of blame. We can even choose to forgive the dreadful acts that have been done by some human beings. And in choosing to forgive, we can hold a blessing, a prayer, that each individual, each and every divine being can realize for themselves that there is nothing shameful about who they are, about what weakness they may have, about which weaknesses they may have expressed. We simply can choose again, setting an intention within ourselves to remember who we are. Who we are in each moment since the moment of our birth. We are holy. We are divine. We are sacred beings. And we hold that sacred son and daughtership for ourselves, for our family members, for our perceived enemies. Without knowing each person's private story, we allow them the grace of knowing that they are divine, and that if they knew of their own divinity, they might choose to live differently. We hold this truth as sacred, as a part of who we are, and as a part of how we choose to live in this world. We choose to have an intention of recognizing the divinity of humanity. Recognizing that some people are unaware of their own divinity. We choose to live and teach with love and intention, that we model the behavior that we would like others to exhibit. We hold this truth as sacred. We hold it as a prayer, the prayer of our heart. And so it is, and so we let it be. Amen. This is a time when we share. Some people have slips that say they give regularly on a regular basis. They can bless those. We have a square in the back if you'd like to use a credit card. And we actually take things like checks and money. But this is how our community continues to support itself. So I invite you to join us in our offertory blessing. Divine love through me blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. So I invite you to create some lovely energy to bless our kids. So, you are loved, special, and important. We see you and bless the divine being that you are. Yay, kids. All right, let's close with our prayer for protection. The light of God surrounds us. I am that light. The love of God enfolds us. I am that love. The power of God protects us. I am that power. The presence of God watches over us. I am that presence. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well.